So now we know what variation is, the production and use of variance, and we know what variants are. These are the things entering into variation. Now I want to move on to a third veto, and that is variables. What are variables, you ask? Well, variables are anything that varies. And when we're studying sociolinguistics, the sociolinguistics of variation, the variables we're interested in come in two kinds. One is a list of linguistic variables. These are the things that change in language on any linguistic level. So the alternates or the choice between think and think is a linguistic variable, okay, on the level of phonetics. So all these things happen in language. Those are linguistic variables, and we study them over there in pretty straight traditional linguistics. Then there are the reasons why people choose one variant or another. In this case, think or tink, it would be a geolinguistic location, Irish around Dublin, not pretending to be English or being proud of being Irish or whatever. And all of those things are social variables. So the social variables might include things like geolinguistic location, where you are in the world, your social class, in some cases, your sex, because men and women use language differently. It could mean your ethnic group as well, since different ethnic groups use it differently. It could be any number of things that don't strictly concern language, they concern society and where you are in society. Okay? Now, the main synthetic kind of social variable that we'll be looking at is called domain. And domain in social linguistics really refers to the various institutions that we have where variants tend to come together. For example, the family or the home is a domain because people use language there in a way that they tend not to use outside of the family. Intimate social use, for example. Intimate, affectionate, or with the kind of abuse that you get. People in families get angry with each other and then they're friends, but they use that language in a particular way in the family that they don't use outside of the family. Or, for example, sport. In sport, we tend to use familiar terms that we don't use in other domains, such as, well, an education institution, school, for example. Church is another domain which has its own special, sacred, or formal kind of language use, depending on the kind of church you go to. So, in your life, if you map around the various names you've got that people use for referring to you, you could probably map onto those linguistic variables, a series of social variables which would come more or less according to domain. How many domains do you have in your life? If you move through a lot of domains, you're likely to have quite a lot of names, and vice versa. The social variables could be anything. They can be performance related as well. We could study how people talk when they get angry, or when they get very nervous, or when they're very happy, or when they've had a lot of alcohol or other kinds of drugs, and how that affects their language use. In English, it happens that alcohol, I don't know about this, I'm told, you can experiment for yourself on a Friday or Saturday night or whatever. In English, the phonetic variants that tend to be affected by the social variable alcohol are with the sh, the fricatives, okay? In fact, stops, fricative, affricatives, anything that requires serious work by your muscles around your mouth tends not to work so well when you have lots of alcohol. experiment with your languages and see what happens when you get the social variable, alcohol, interacting with your linguistic variables. What is sociolinguistics? Well, it's quite simple. If we have these linguistic variables and these social variables, sociolinguistics looks for correlations and logical relationships between one and the other. The social and the linguistic is connected through sociolinguistics. A lot of what we'll be doing in this course comes from an American social linguist, William Labov, billed to his friends, who did most of his work at the University of Pennsylvania. And he worked a lot on the relationship between social variables concerning ethnicity, race, and social mobility, and phonetic variables. And he looked at the way American Englishes change, particularly in urban environments, according to the different ethnic makeups and the changing demographics of American cities. Okay, that's one kind of social linguistics. In the United Kingdom, where race wasn't such an issue, we tend to get more studies on gender, men and women using language differently, and class, since British society is highly divided according to class rather than ethnicity in traditional terms. Okay, so different kinds of social linguistics have developed according to different social environments and social problematics. Here in Catalonia, it's interesting to look at different genders, and it's interesting to look at social class, and it's interesting to look at ethnicity. But perhaps the most interesting thing is to look at the different languages that are being used. For example, if I walk into a shop here in Tarragona and I start to speak Catalan, will a person reply to me in Catalan or switch to Spanish? Or what kind of shops will that happen in? What happens if I come in and I speak Spanish? Will they reply to me in Catalan? What happens if I come in and I speak English? In some parts of Tarragona, where we are here, we're going to get a reply in some kind of English, or not. Here, because we have many languages around us, perhaps the language, the linguistic variables that are most interesting are those of what's called code switching, when people change from one language to another. And then we would look at the social variables that concern why people choose to speak Catalan or choose to speak Spanish or choose to speak something else, or choose to mix them in certain ways. So the social linguistics that has been done in the United States concerns the kinds of variation that have been important there. The same in the United Kingdom. And here, when we get to look at what's happening around us here, we could choose quite a different kind of social linguistics according to the linguistic variables that are important to us here and the particular social variables that inform the society we live in.